Yeah, that Taylor Swift video got 45 million views before it was ever taken down. And
there's no history and tradition of allowing this type of content, this type of behavior to be protected by the First Amendment.
It seems that one of the big problems is that anybody can use the internet and create deep fakes of any kind, and there's no way of knowing who created it.
But you can reverse engineer. You can look at IP addresses. That's kind of what happened with the Biden deepfake call.
State and local law enforcement are having to deal with these issues because the technology companies are not taking the steps on the front end to build these tools with safety by design.
Groups like NCMEC are taking on tons of information, but not necessarily having enough time to process it. And they have a mandatory deletion time.
It is disappointing that I have to sit down in here and, fighting for the girls of Westfield and other girls of United States because my school didn't have the balls to do so.
In a report of CSAM online platforms grew from 32 million in 2022 to 36 million in 2023. What is the #1 platform that you're finding that's distributing this?
GAI and deepfakes, it's a difficult question because some of the companies that are reporting the most are doing the most. Stable Diffusion, which is owned by Stability AI, they're not even registered to report to the cyber tip line.
I'm pleased now to introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. Our first witness is Mrs. Dorata Manny, a mother whose high school daughter was a victim of deepfake technology. We appreciate you being here today, Ms. Manny, to share your and your daughter's experience and message with us. Our second witness is Mr. John Shehan, Senior Vice President of the Exploited Children Division and International Engagement at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Our third witness is Mr. Szabo, Vice President and General Counsel of Netchoice. And our fourth witness today is Dr. Ari Ezra Waldman, Professor of Law at the University of California's Irvine School of Law. To piggyback on Dr. Waldman, that Taylor Swift video got 45 million views before it was ever taken down. And there are people today who don't know that it was a deep fake, probably believe that it was still real because they don't know the difference and didn't know it was taken down because it was a deep fake. So appreciate everyone's points today. My first questions will go to Mrs. Manny. And first of all, I just want to say as a mom of a 14-year-old girl, it's horrifying to know what your daughter went through and the fact that they released the names. I didn't have that detail, but it really pains me to hear that. I was raped at the age of 16 by a classmate of mine in high school. I dropped out of school shortly thereafter, and I can only imagine as a mom what my mom felt at the time. It's a deeply painful experience, and I'm really sorry that it happened to you. And any woman or young girl that's gone through this, I hate what they have felt and the shame that they've gone through. And on that point, when George Stephanopoulos rape shamed me on Sunday on ABC News this week, I want to make sure that no woman or girl is ever treated that way. And I hope that your daughter, that we can put a stop to that. So first of all, my first question to you, in your written testimony about what was done to your daughter, you state this event left her feeling helpless and powerless. As a mom, can you talk to us a little bit about what this has done to your family?
Yes, so I probably will not share what you want to hear, but the moment when Francesca was informed of her counselor, her vice principal, that she was one of the AI victims, she did feel helpless and powerless. And then she went out from the office and she has noticed group of boys making fun of a group of girls that were very emotional on the hallway. And that second, she turned from sad to mad, and now because of you, all of you, we feel very empowered because I think you guys are listening. And just like you pointed out, you are a father, I think we are all human beings. We all have children, and we all have brothers and sisters that we want to protect. And we should sit down together and figure out a way how to fix it. And I am so sorry that Mr. Stephanopoulos shamed you. I think that's the narrative that must change in media. It's besides upsetting, it's just irresponsible and dangerous. The narrative needs to be changed. And instead of talking about girls and how they feel as a victim, we should be talking about the boys and how are they being empowered by the people in power, especially in my case in education, by being left unaccountable. Walking the hallways with the girls. My daughter doesn't mind, I do.
Well, I just at the state level, how many states have updated their laws so far?
So right now, we've been working with states across the country. Wisconsin is about to enact the 2 recommended pieces.
Are they the first?
I don't want to say they're the first, but they're definitely one of the leaders on this. They're going to actually enact both the recommended Stop Deepfake CSAM Act as well as the Stop Non-Consensual Artificially Generated Images Act. California right now, we're working with lawmakers out there to make sure that their introduced legislation doesn't get thrown out by a court when a bad actor gets arrested. And so we are seeing many states across the country start to adopt this. To your home state of South Carolina, I would love to see that.
That's what I'm going to bring up before I have 40 seconds left, is talk to you about South Carolina's laws. And I'm going to look up impersonations and forgeries. I'm not quite as familiar with state law. Obviously, that's not my jurisdiction. But when I looked at what was going on, when I found out about these women in my district that had been recorded without their knowledge or consent, I looked at state law. State law 16-17-470 is under peeping Tom voyeurism laws. A $500 fine and up to 3 years in jail for the first offense is offensive. It's not a felony until the second offense. But clearly it's not enough. But there is not digital. There's nothing that would include, I believe, deepfakes in there. So I would love to talk to you about, and actually even work with our state legislature, who I know our state legislature is working on revenge porn laws, but I also want to strengthen state law in all ways with non-consensual images and videos.
Mr. Szabo, if I understood him correctly, was suggesting we don't really need a lot of new laws. There are some gaps, but how about enforcing what we got, both at the state level and the federal level? What's your sense of that? I mean, we're all about, I'm addressing you, Dr. Waldman.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, Congress is all about passing laws. Do we need to pass more laws? I mean, are there, in fact, some significant gaps that allow malign things to happen that we could perhaps prevent?
Especially in this situation. We've seen it before with non-consensual pornography. We needed new laws on the books because existing defamation or existing tort law had too many gaps, especially when victims originally allowed the image to be taken or video to be taken in the context of a consensual relationship, but then distributed without their consent. So we needed new laws, and we've seen some progress. My colleague at GW Law School, Marianne Franks, has been a leader in working with legislatures to pass legislation all across the country. So that's just one example. There are so many gaps here as well.
So I invite you to provide us a list of those gaps, because we'd be glad to work on filling those legislative gaps.
Can you tell us what is the experience of deepfake regulatory legislation in the states, and have they survived First Amendment attack, and what is the best model for creating a statute to deal with the problem?
So we don't have a lot of examples of state legislation focusing specifically on deepfakes, but we have examples of state legislation focusing on non-consensual pornography that has gone to be challenged on First Amendment grounds, and they have been upheld. Minnesota is a really good example. The state Supreme Court handed down, and Illinois handed down excellent decisions saying that, just as I discussed in my written testimony, there's no reason why this kind of non-consensual, harmful activity has ever been protected by the First Amendment. And Congressman Connolly, you're talking about history and tradition. Here we have an example. There's no history and tradition of allowing this type of content, this type of behavior to be protected by the First Amendment.
It seems that one of the big problems is that anybody can use the internet and create deep fakes of any kind, and there's no way of knowing who created it. And that's a big challenge.
Exactly. So what we need to do is better identify the perpetrators. I completely agree that it is a challenge, but you can reverse engineer. You can look at IP addresses. That's kind of what happened with the Biden deepfake call. Once they've
I wanted to go to that. So they were able to charge them because it was fraudulent in that he wasn't actually pulling out of the race, and there's all kind of laws associated with that. What if instead of law, would it be illegal if the same individual, instead of saying that the president was pulling out of the race, did dozens of videos of him falling upstairs or stammering or stuttering? I mean, you know, those will have equally adverse impacts on a campaign. What law would apply if somebody did a video of him falling into Marine One or falling out of Marine One? I mean,
yeah,
is that illegal?
So it's a
the
complex.
answer is no.
Yeah,
I don't think it is.
It depends is kind of the problem, because you have the public figure doctrine, you have satire. There's a lot that goes into that. States have tried to look at this, by requiring campaign videos that use altered images to have a disclosure. But the challenge there, again, is in the definition. So if a politician were standing in front of a green screen, that would be defined as an altered image, and all of a sudden you have to put at the bottom of your campaign ad, there are fake images in
Again,
this campaign
I mean,
ad.
there's so many different bizarre media outlets. I mean, you couldn't put a video of a fake video of the president falling, which again, there's many that exist that are not fake. But I mean, if you had a fake one, you couldn't put it on television because it gets vetted through legal. You couldn't theoretically run an ad on a radio that is fabricated because the radio station has liability if they're going to release an ad that's fake. I mean, but again, the internet is such a wide area of media consumption that none of these laws really have any enforcement mechanism. So what would you say how would you address a deep fake that would be detrimental to someone's political campaign or life short of non-consensual pornography, but still is equally bad? We don't have laws for that.
Well, so you could bring an action under existing tort law for defamation of character, misappropriation.
Why is it defamation if you're falling over?
Because if it's not a real image, it is a.
What if I fell over in a different image?
So I was going to say it depends.
Truth again.
Yeah.
Truth is the ultimate defense to defamation.
So when it comes to non-consensual disclosures, for example, you have the Hulk Hogan versus Gawker example that played out under existing privacy law. So there is potential there. There are a lot of laws out there that can be enforced today, and to the extent that we do find gaps, we need to make sure that when we fill them, that we do so in a constitutional way.
Professor Waldman, in what ways does non-consensual deepfake pornography contribute to the growing crises of childhood trauma?
I need more than 2.5 minutes to describe all those ways, but very briefly, the non-consensual deepfake pornography does more than just non-consensual pornography in that not only does it objectify and make someone at risk of someone who's always looking over their shoulder, of every image, every social encounter that they engage in, which deters them from engaging with other people, which is necessary at any age of life. But also, it allows for this to happen even if you don't have any images out there, right? Because these images can be created even with a simple instruction to an AI generator. Essentially, what it does is it creates perpetual trauma and perpetual risk of trauma.
How is law enforcement reacting to the uptick in AI-generated sexual or child sexual abuse material, CSAM? Has that approach been reactive, as in waiting for images to circulate, or are there ways law enforcement can be more proactive?
Excellent question. In a lot of the scenarios, these are reactive because we're outlined earlier that many of the generative AI technology companies, they're not taking proactive measures to identify and stop the creation of that material on the onset. It's often after the content has already made its way into the wild that you have social media companies and the such that are finding these types of material and reporting it into our cyber tip line, and we in turn provide that information to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force members who are actively investigating these cases. One quick example, in the fourth quarter of last year, we had a report that came through. It was made by Facebook regarding an adult male who was talking through Messenger to a minor using stable diffusion to create child sexual abuse content. Sent it to the minor. It was detected and reported. The Wisconsin ICAC investigated that case, found out not only was he creating content, possessed child sexual abuse material, and through the forensic interviews, also realized he was abusing his 5-year-old son. State and local law enforcement are having to deal with these issues because the technology companies are not taking the steps on the front end to build these tools with safety by design. We're getting this content out into the wild far too early, and something has to be done about this.
What are the biggest gaps in the current legal framework that need to be filled?
So there's a case called Ashcroft v. Freedom of Speech Coalition, and basically what it got into is an overly broad law, well-intentioned to prohibit these types of activities, but it applied to non-actual victims of fake images. And the U.S. Supreme Court shot that down. They said it's a violation of the First Amendment. So one of the gaps is the type of legislation that we've been talking about here, whether it is the chairwoman's legislation, as well as some of the other bills that have been proposed from all sides of the aisle, to kind of fill that gap and make crystal clear that AI-created content, if it has the image of an actual or identifiable child, is CSAM material, as opposed to the way the laws are currently written, which requires an actual photo. So we are seeing time and time again the bad actors are escaping justice. At the same time, the Invest in Child Safety Act, I think, is a really important one to give law enforcement the tools it needs. One other thing to address is groups like NCMEC are taking on tons of information, but not necessarily having enough time to process it. And they have a mandatory deletion time for content, so giving them a bit more time to process and prosecute content that they receive and tips that they receive, I think would be helpful as well.
Did you feel you got any support from the actual school itself?
I received zero support, and it is disappointing that I have to sit down in here and, you know, fighting for the girls of Westfield and other girls of United States because my school didn't have the balls to do so. Also, in contrast, as you mentioned, the Beverly Hills incident, that principal or superintendent, you know, withdrew the boys from the school, completed his investigation within 10 days. He did the right thing. Was it an easy choice? No, but it was the right thing. And I think our girls should not be solo gladiators fighting for their rights. It's shameful that in 2024, we need to fight still for our rights.
In a report of CSAM online platforms grew from 32 million in 2022 to 36 million in 2023. What factors do you think have contributed to this trend?
That's an excellent question, and much of it is around just the global scale and ability to create and disseminate child sexual abuse material. This is truly a global issue. The 36 million reports last year involved more than 90% were outside the United States, individuals using U.S. servers. But we're also seeing a massive increase in the number of reports that we're receiving regarding the enticement of children for sexual acts. In your chart there, you know, in 2021, we had about 80,000 reports regarding the online enticement of children. Last year, it jumped up to 180,000 reports. Not even through the first quarter of this year, we're already over 100,000 reports regarding the enticement of children. Many of these cases are involving generative AI. Others are financial sextortion. So there are individuals in countries like Nigeria and the Ivory Coast, and it's all about the money. They're blackmailing young boys to create a sexually explicit image, just that one image, and then they're after the money.
The deepfakes.
Significant amounts of money.
Just out of curiosity, in regards, because we have legislation. I know that I'm co-sponsoring Representative Mace's legislation in regards to deepfakes. But in regards to the #1 platform that you're finding that this is being circulated on, and I know that this has been a question of how do these online platforms moderate this content, what is the #1 platform that you're finding that's distributing this?
Well, so GAI and deepfakes, it's a difficult question because some of the companies that are reporting the most are doing the most. I mentioned earlier OpenAI. They are setting the bar for what every single other generative AI company should be doing in this space. I also gave an example just a minute ago about Stable Diffusion, which is owned by Stability AI. They're not even registered to report to the cyber tip line. So we have a huge gap in some of these providers who are enabling individuals to create child sexual abuse content, and they're not even set up to report. So it's difficult to give a top provider when there are so many that aren't even doing a bare minimum.
So what would you say the bare minimums are?
Well, certainly taking proactive steps that if someone's trying to use these tools to create child sexual abuse material or modify it or text prompts to create, they shouldn't be allowing that to happen. We started off this session, Ranking Member Conley had mentioned the Stanford Internet Observatory research that was done that discovered that there was child sexual abuse material in the training set of these data that was given to the OpenAI models to train on. How did that even happen?
Yeah.
How is there child sexual abuse material in the content that they're training on? So there's so many things that we work backwards on to rectify the situation that we're in right now.
How do you think Congress can help ensure that these entities are better prepared to combat the issue of non-consensual deepfake pornography?
I actually think we should establish a round table without pointing fingers and ask them for solutions. They are the experts. They will teach us more than we can ever know. So that's one. Number two, create a coalition of companies, platforms that host the illegal content, like Google, Amazon, and a few others, as well as the financial platforms that facilitate spread of that content, like Amex, Google, Visa, PayPal, et cetera, to come to the table because it's the right thing to do. You know, I've watched, just like every one of us watched the Senate hearing, and every single platform said the same thing that you said today. We are fathers and we are mothers, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to sit down and figure out ways how to fix it without laws and legislations, put laws and legislations in place, and then put accountability on the perpetrators or the bad actors.
Thank you. If I could ask you, Dr. Waldman, in the few seconds I have left, could you talk about the importance of a multi-pronged approach, civil and criminal, in whatever it is we ultimately decide to do here?
Sure. I think I think a civil remedy approach is a step forward, but insufficient for a couple of reasons. We're not sure, we can't be sure that a simple threat of civil damages would be enough, because so many of the perpetrators of this are, you know, the dude in the basement who's probably judgment-proof, and so you won't be made whole by a civil remedy. Relying on a civil remedy alone puts the burden entirely on the victim, right? And civil litigation is really expensive. So when you're not Taylor Swift, as we said before, it's really hard to even start something like that. And then in certain situations, we have a history of under-criminalizing bad things that happen to women and intersectionally marginalized women in particular. So while I think we need to be concerned about people in power misusing their power in certain situations, we want to make sure we criminalize this kind of behavior in other instances for important reasons, because it's so bad, because we need that deterrent effect. And I fear that without this comprehensive approach, including government organizations like CISA getting involved in helping platforms do what they should be doing on this, then we're going to leave victims without any recourse.
These victims should be allowed to get their content back, real or fake, if their image and their likeness is part of it, and know that it's been destroyed forever from every device, any cloud, anywhere online. And we're not there yet, and it's deeply troubling. So civil damages are not enough, and in some cases, I mean, there's not even criminal action here. I mean, I look at the Violence Against Women Act, and it's just a civil right of action, not even criminal. I think if you're doing voyeurism at the federal level, you got to be like over international water for it to be against federal law under Title 18. Like, it's insane to me. And so I'm deeply passionate about trying to correct some of this, correct course, find the gaps, like as you said, Mr. Szabo, in definitions. While we were sitting here today, I went into the South Carolina's Code of Laws, and I just looked up the word porn. Doesn't exist in South Carolina's Code of Laws. So when we're talking about definitions, certainly there is, I agree with you, there is room for improvement, there are gaps here, and I really want to figure out how we move forward in a bipartisan manner at the federal level, but also with states, especially my home state of South Carolina. There's a lot of work to do. $500 fine for voyeurism the first time as a misdemeanor is wrong, and it's offensive, and it should be a much more expensive. We want to make sure that a man who does that to over a dozen women in South Carolina doesn't ever do it again, and a $500 fine and 3 years in jail just doesn't cut it. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned, and thank you.